He loathed Bob Hope. Now we know why. He called him a national treasure on television. But behind the scenes, Johnny Carson despised Bob Hope. And now we finally know why. Hope was the most influential man in comedy. But he used that influence to take, not give. Carson, the undisputed late-night king, ultimately banned him. And off the stage, it became one of the chilliest feuds in Hollywood history. What led to the break between these two icons? Why did Johnny Carson, the most gracious man in show business, lose it? And tonight, 50 years later, NBC airs Bob Hope's Christmas Goodwill from Saudi Arabia. It's on at 9:30. Would you trudge? Two legends, one stage. For 30 years, Johnny Carson invited America into his living room 5 nights a week with his Midwestern charm, impeccable timing, and genuine curiosity about his guests. Carson transformed The Tonight Show into a national institution. When Johnny laughed, America laughed with him. When he raised an eyebrow, viewers knew exactly what he was thinking without a single word spoken. Carson hadn't simply inherited The Tonight Show. He had retooled it. Assuming command from Jack for 1962, he turned what had been a capricious, sometimes explosive show into the gold standard of television. Where Parr had been mercurial and emotional, Carson was understated and exact. His Nebraskan stoicism made a wonderful background for humor. His responses frequently funnier than the jokes themselves. Johnny knew more about television than anyone, said Ed McMahon, his long-term sidekick. He knew precisely how long to maintain a glance, precisely when to cut in on a yarn, precisely how to rescue an onstage guest who was floundering. It wasn't talent, it was technique. Bob Hope, on the other hand, had created an entertainment dynasty that stretched from vaudeville through radio, film, and television. His 70 years in show business made him more than a celebrity. He was an American institution. Presidents sought his presence. The military loved him for his ubiquitous USO tours. His Christmas specials were an American institution, attracting tens of millions of viewers through the early 1970s. Hope had become a star by sheer force of personality and relentless drive. Born in England and raised in Cleveland, he had dominated every medium he tried. Vaudeville stages, radio waves, film screens, and finally television, where his NBC specials formed a staple of the network's programming strategy. Bob was not only a star, he was a corporation a top NBC executive remembered. He had writers, a production firm, business managers, an entire machinery devoted to keeping him atop the entertainment firmament. And at the hub of it all was Bob, pushing everything forward through sheer willpower. On the surface, these two comedy titans should have been natural bedfellows, elder statesmen and worthy heir, bound together by their command of the art and their unmatched sway over American popular culture. They were the two most dominant men in comedy, said a former NBC executive who worked for both men. Hope had paved the road on which Carson rode, and there should have been respect for each other. But behind the scenes, tension was the only thing. That tension was largely invisible to the public. As Hope was a guest on The Tonight Show, one saw what seemed like good-natured repartee between coworkers. Carson welcomed Hope with proper deference, terming him our greatest entertainer and an American treasure. Hope retaliated in his usual rapid-fire manner and self-deprecating one-liners. Those who worked for the show knew otherwise. The smiles vanished as soon as the cameras were off. Carson's own warmth with most of the other guests, his signature, was noticeably lacking with Hope. The dialogue, so smooth and spontaneous with other guests, grew stale and robotic. You could feel the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees when Hope walked onto that set, recalled a longtime Tonight Show staffer. Johnny's smile never reached his eyes. It was like watching two prize fighters circling each other looking for an opening. Behind the scenes, Carson's staff dreaded Hope's appearances. The demands began days before Hope would arrive at the Burbank studios. His staff would bring over precise lighting, camera, and seating specifications, requests that other visitors did not make. He would insist on advance approval of any scheduled comedy pieces or sketches, and on occasion kill ideas that Carson writers had worked on for days. Hope treated The Tonight Show as his program, not Johnny's, a former production assistant said. His people would move furniture around, reset lighting, even direct camera operators were to position themselves. No other guest would have dared, not even presidents or stars. But Hope behaved as if he owned the studio. The question that had confounded Hollywood insiders for years was why. What could possibly have fostered such hostility between two men who appear to have so much in common? Carson, ever the consummate professional, never went on record as to his opinion of Hope while he was hosting. Hope, aware of his surgically enhanced public persona, kept up the pretense of admiration. But as the years went by and Carson's influence increased, the fissures in this pretense became harder to keep hidden. By the late 1980s, insiders in the business understood that something had irreparably crumbled between these two comedy icons. Something that would ultimately drive Carson to take the unprecedented step of silently banning one of America's most popular entertainers from his program. The feud between Hope and Carson was more than a personal conflict. It was a clash between two inherently different methods of comedy, of television, and of fame itself. A generational gap that said a lot about how entertainment was evolving in late 20th century America. That's it. What? This is another thing. This is a wine steward's thing, and I want to give it to this guy on my right. The few different worlds collide. By the 1980s, Bob Hope had been famous longer than many Americans have been alive. His routines were as familiar as his ski slope nose and his theme song, Thank for the Memory. He had lived through vaudeville radio, the Hollywood Golden Age, and the revolution of television. Throughout it all, he had remained at the pinnacle of the entertainment hierarchy, an impressive achievement in a business notorious for its volatility. Hope's humor had been revolutionary during its day. During the 1930s and 1940s, his wise guy, fast-talking image with its combination of bravado and cowardice had won over audiences seeking a new type of comic hero. His road pictures with Bing Crosby set a standard for buddy comedies that would be used in movies for decades to come. His topical, joke-filled monologues and good-natured political jabs had once seemed new and risky. When Hope began political comedy in his radio days, it was revolutionary, said a comedy historian. He mocked FDR, Congress, wartime rationing, topics that had once been off-limits to mainstream entertainers. He helped create the tradition of comedians commenting on the news that we now take for granted. But survival in show business means evolving, and it's here that Hope started to stumble. As he hit his 80s, his comedy style remained stuck in the past. The same rapid-fire delivery, the same current quips regarding golf, presidents, and his own aging process. What had once been fresh was now growing increasingly mechanical. Hope's comedy was becoming formulaic. His monologues had a strict structure, an age-put-down joke, a presidential comment, a remark about his golfing, a mention of his wife Dolores, and of course a joke about his ski slope nose. The topics varied a little over the years, but the rhythms were the same year in and year out, decade after decade. By the 1980s, Hope was basically doing an impersonation of Bob Hope, a comedy writer who worked for the legend briefly at the end of his career observed. The issue wasn't his age. It was that he refused to change. George Burns was older, but he continued to come up with new angles, continued to surprise audiences. Hope simply repeated the same formulas using current references. Johnny Carson saw this change, or lack of it, more clearly than many others. As a comedy student and TV master, Carson knew that Hope's sustained success rested not on creativity or artistic evolution, but on the force of nostalgia and his scrupulously preserved status as an American icon. Carson admired authentic comedy craftsmanship, said a former writer for The Tonight Show. He admired Don Rickles because while Rickles had an act, each show was in the moment. He admired Jonathan Winters because Winters was a risk-taker, sometimes bombed, but always attempted to be unexpected. Hope, in Carson's estimation, had long ago ceased to take risks decades ago. The core issue wasn't Hope's style of comedy. It was his attitude toward television itself. Hope matured in a time when television was basically film theater, when actors read scripted material to a camera as if it were another person in the room. Carson knew better, though. He knew that television was an intimate medium, one that would show authenticity or its lack in cold relief. Hope's sense of privilege was Johnny's tipping point. according to a former Tonight Show producer. During the 1980s, Hope was still appearing on The Tonight Show after he had ceased performing stand-up and ceased writing new jokes. He was riding on his legend, and Carson couldn't bear it. The